What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Dylan Talks Tone. Welcome to the Just Gonna Say It podcast that we do every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us. We're going to talk about guitar stuff today because that's what we do on this here podcast. I should tell everybody, as always, our live streams are ad-free. So if you want to support the channel, you can do a couple things. You can use a super chat to ask a question. There's going to be a lot of discussion today, and I want to get some thoughts from you. So just so you know, that's part of the deal. We'd like you to be in the chat over here live. For those of you that are not watching this live, we will upload it to the other podcast platforms, etc. Afterwards. I think I got a couple to catch up on, but we will be able to do that. The other way you can support us is use the links in the description. Those are companies that support the channel. So if you support those companies, you are supporting the channel. Even if you don't want to buy guitar stuff, there's other cool stuff down there. Fountain pens and all kinds of stuff. Also, I should mention that we have some new merch on the website. This shirt is actually not out yet. It's out. It'll come out Saturday. But there's a couple new ones. Long Live Dylan Talks Tone and what's the other one? Oh yeah, the just as good as shirt. So that's pretty cool too. So I want to talk a little bit about. This is something that came up as a result of the video that we did yesterday. As I was making that video about the Telecaster pickups, I was thinking about all the vintage spec stuff versus modern stuff. And people really want to get hung up on vintage spec stuff. But we're going to talk today about why I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think doing that is a little bit of a misnomer. I think you will end up wasting some time, and you might not get the guitar you want if you spend a bunch of time trying to get vintage spec stuff on your guitar. We're actually going to go through a bunch of components that go into a guitar, and we're going to talk about the things individually. If you have questions or thoughts about this, get in the chat and let me know about it. Now, obviously, some of this stuff you're going to say, well, I don't care that there's a quote unquote technical problem with it. I just think it's cool. And I'm kind of that way too, right? Like there are certain things that I just think they're cool. So even if it's not the most optimal thing, sometimes the vintage spec thing is just cool, and it's cool and you like it, and there's no problem with that. But the reason I want to make this video and talk to you about it during the podcast today is really chatting about what the vintage spec stuff was and what it was made for versus the kind of music and stuff and how we play now. Let's see. Jose says, you ruined Anderton's for me now. Lee taking over everyone and being like, but wait, there's more. And oh yeah. I don't like his interviews. They've got a great channel. I love it, but I just don't like the way he talks over people. So let's see here real quick. I'm just going to go back through and, double check and see what we got going on. The only vintage spec that seems kind of cool for me is a nitrocellulose finish. Only for that it can look beat up quicker and nicer than. Okay, so yeah, we'll just get in. We'll get into this right now. Let's see. Okay, so I just want to make sure we got caught up. If you use a super chat, I'll try to jump on that right away. If you ask a question, put a bunch of question marks in front of it, and we will try to get to it. Okay, so let's start. Let's literally go from one end of the guitar to the other. So let's start with tuners. When we start talking about vintage spec tuners, there's a few kind of major, I don't want to say problems, but technology has moved ahead and stuff is better now. Okay. There's a lot of progress in all of this that we may not think of as progress, but it is actually progress. Like the stuff is better. Okay. So if you take a look at vintage Gibson or Fender tuners, oftentimes they're stamped steel with plastic gears, right? And they are, a lot of them have the plastics, or quote unquote plastics, that they used to use would break down over time. The ratios were a lot lower. So that would mean that every time you turn, the tuner a little bit, you would get a lot on the post, for example. And then, of course, for those of you who really like locking tuners, there weren't any, right? So you have stiff, easily breakable, stamped steel. The good thing about stamped steel is it's light. It's not heavy. So if you're trying to balance your guitar a certain way, tuners are a great way to do that. And so sometimes a lot of these newer die-cast tuners can be kind of heavy, but there's a lot of newer tuners now that are not heavy. Hipshot makes a lot of really nice stuff, locking and not locking, and, with brass open gears. Like, there's a lot of really nice stuff out there now. There's tons of brands that make great stuff that I'm sure that you can think of, that work way better. The tuners that we just put on this Telecaster that I'm putting together, 19-1, right? And I think an old Gibson is 14, something like that. That makes a big difference when you're trying to tune accurately. I like vintage tuners on a Fender. I like that stamped steel look. I think it's cool. I am pretty easy on my stuff. I don't beat on my stuff super hard, so it doesn't bother me. And I also like safety posts. I'm a fan of safety posts. That's like, a lot of people don't like them. I really like them. But so I like those. However, to be fair, if we're trying to make a guitar that works well, that is super functional, that is really reliable, the vintage stuff is not the way to go. If you're really looking at it pragmatically, the newer stuff is better, right? Now, does it look as good? That's a matter of opinion, of course. But the newer stuff is better. They have made, for example, think of ratio gear tuners. Those things are great. Those GravTech things, those things are awesome because, like your low E and your high E will actually, because of the thickness of the string, will be at a little bit different ratio. That stuff's really cool. Like that's all actual progress. That is actually better. It's an improvement. But we don't often think of that, as we're working on our guitar and making improvements to our guitar. Hey, buddy. If you'll notice here, I'm drinking Coke today because I needed some sugar and caffeine intake because we added a new family member to our family yesterday. And come here, buddy. He might not. Well, if he comes back over here, I'll grab him. But he had me up from 2:45 in the morning till about 4. So puppies are a lot of work. Hey, bud. Oh, okay. Leslie. Yeah, bring him here. Yeah, so you got to see him. He's super cool. And for those of you that are listening, I'll explain here in a minute. Leslie will just bring him in and show him to you real quick. He's, I know this is a little side step, but my favorite tuners are the vintage style Fender ones. Okay, here he is. This is our new little Weimaraner puppy. His name is Zeba, and he is cool, and he really likes us. But yeah, he is 13 weeks old, and he weighs 21 pounds already. He is huge. Okay, let's go back to your comment about I dig vintage tuners. They are basically locking tuners. Okay, yeah, actually, the safety post ones, when you bend them in there and you do it correctly, they kind of do lock in. That you're kind of right about that. The only thing is, a lot of times with the locking tuners, you can literally, once they're locked, you only need one hand. It's a speed thing, right? The best ones, in my opinion, are the Goto ones that have the vintage look on the tip, but have great ratios locking functionality. The tip lock is is really important. I get. Okay. So yeah, so you're right. Like there's a bunch of tuners like what you're saying that are kind of retaining the vintage looks, but have more functionality in them. And so, yeah, I think that's great. I think there's like we're talking about, there are many ways to get there. However, if you're shopping from the beginning and you're wondering, oh, should I get this guitar with these tuners on it? You just got to think about that stuff. Let's talk about the nut. This is going to make a lot of people maybe a little upset. Bone nuts are not the best material for a nut. They just aren't. Bone nuts became the norm because that's what there was. There was no synthetic material that was millable when guitars became a thing and became a consumer product. Like a millable product, bone was it. That doesn't make it the best material. It is not. There are a lot of materials that are way better than bone. They sound better, they machine better, they last better, and they don't smell. Bone is not as good. It's too porous. It's too irregular. You have to waste too much of it to get a good piece. There's just a lot of reasons to not use bone. I don't use bone in anything anymore. It's when I do my own stuff, I don't use bone in anything. A lot of the synthetic stuff is just a lot more consistent. And people will say, well, none of this synthetic stuff is as good as bone because they'll come up with a bunch of different ideas. But here's the thing. With a man-made material, you can do everything that you can do with a bone, but better. So you can control the density. You can control the hardness. It's a man-made material. You can control every parameter. You control the slickness. Yeah, in fact, you can introduce slickness that's not supposed to be there in a bone. There's all kinds of stuff. Oh, hey, bud. Sorry. Didn't mean to kick you in the face. There's all kinds of parameters that you can manipulate with a man-made material that you cannot with bone, and it's kind of taking a chance. There's voids in bone. If you ever hold up a bone nut to light, a lot of times, it depends on where you get it from. Bleached bone, you won't be able to see it very much, but a lot of times you can see the voids and you can see the various irregularities. Yeah. Of course, they had other materials. Plastic was around. Not in the 1800s when Martins and... Here's the thing. Yes, in the 50s, there was starting to be plastics, but there actually wasn't. ABS was not a consumer product when the Stratocaster and the Telecaster came out. It just wasn't. There was a lot of PVC and ABS in military applications after World War II. But as a consumer product, it did not come out until much later. I've done a lot of research on this because people want to talk a lot about like PVC coated wire and versus cloth coated wire and all that stuff. I've done a lot of research on this. And that's why you see Bakelite. That's why you see Bakelite, because ABS, which is what we have like right now, and this Stratocaster right over here, you have an ABS cover. It's not Bakelite, because Bakelite is basically like a paper product, more or less. So, kind of, I guess. So, plastics were not a thing in consumer product. Everything we have is plastic now, right? But back then, it was not. It was not as widespread. And so, and especially when we're talking about nuts, it was already the norm from guitars before then. So going all the way back, because ABS was technically invented in 1890 something, but they didn't use it for anything. It was not a consumer product until after World War II. So, you can fact check me on all that stuff, but it's basically, the long and the short of it is, it wasn't in outlet covers. You know what I mean? It wasn't everywhere. So yeah, let's see. I want a custom shop Strat real bad. Oh, dude, me too. You and me both. Let's see. And the other thing too is that people who make a big deal out of the tone of it are just plain making it up. Man-made materials can be made to be better than not man-made materials. That's why they are that way. They're all of the, like we said, all the parameters can be adjusted. Yeah. How does the Mike McCready Strat stack against a USA Fender? Is it like an upgraded Mexican one with nitro or higher end? So that guitar is really cool. It is I would say it is a broad mix of, when it comes to a made in Mexico body and neck, there is no difference. Okay. The wood comes from the same place. So there's that. So that makes no difference. Country of assembly has a lot to do with the labor costs, but the part, the wood itself, comes from the same place. And I know that to be true. I've had the conversation with the person who buys that wood. So as far as the components in the guitar, it's a mix. So there are a bunch of like custom shoppy kind of components in there. I mean, it has a paper and oil cap. It has a bunch of custom shop-ish stuff in there. But it's all still assembled in Mexico. It does have PVC coated wire instead of cloth covered wire, I think, which is a thing that a custom shop Strat would have of a certain, like of a 61, which is what this is supposed to be, or whatever, 60, 61, whatever Mike McCready's guitar is. So that's one difference that you wouldn't have in a custom shop Strat. It wouldn't have PVC wire, but a lot of the parts they could be interchangeable. And then it's all assembled in Mexico. The finish, it is nitrocellulose, but it is one of those reproduced relics, right? So it's not, obviously not to the quality of a custom shop guitar, because just the bottom line is it's a production guitar that the hours were not put into that aspect of it. So you can tell. But I don't care. It's so good. The guitar is so good. The finish on the neck is probably one of my favorites of any Strat I've ever played, ever. And I've played a lot of really good Strats. I've played a lot of really, 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 really good Strats. Yeah. Graphite Corian. But I can make bone blanks for 35 cents each. Yeah, so that is an interesting thing because the cost of the synthetic stuff is higher. Yeah, you are right there. That is definitely true. Okay, let's see. Next, frets. This is probably more of a preference, but it's one of those things that I like to mention to people on a lot. And this is not a blanket statement, but you are probably aware, especially for like Gibbs and stuff, a lot of vintage guitars have very small frets. And that can be limiting for some people. I like a bigger fret. I guess a medium jumbo is probably my favorite, but like those narrow talls and the narrows, like all the shorter, skinnier frets, like on, like even my Gibson SG Junior has really small frets on it. Yeah, my Les Paul's got pretty small frets on it too. And my Strat that I built has bigger frets on it. So as you get into more modern builds or more modern takes on older builds, because that will be one of the specs that, like, for example, when Fender comes out with a new product, that's one of the things they'll do, right? It'll be kind of vintagey, but then they might put a more modern fret size in it. It just makes it more comfortable to play, in my opinion. Now, some people might really like small frets and might look for that spec. But if I want everything vintage, just think about that before you make that choice and think about what your favorite guitar is. Now, a lot of people will say, well, what fret size should I get in my guitar? I can only play X or Y or whatever. If you're going to buy a guitar based on choice, my suggestion would be look at what is in your favorite guitar that you already own It doesn't matter if it's a $200 guitar or a $10,000 guitar. It doesn't matter the quality of it, but what's the one that you are the most comfortable on? Neck profile and fret size. And then look for something kind of similar to that, so that you can be comfortable on it, especially if you're buying through the mail, because a lot of people are buying through the mail, right? Yeah, that happens. Are you saying the nut material does not affect any of the tonal characteristics? I've used a bone versus brass, and there is absolutely a noticeable difference. I didn't say that at all. No, I did not say that at all. What I'm saying is that bone is not the best way anymore. It's not. I'm not saying it doesn't make a difference, but I'm saying that you could get a synthetic material that will make it to where you cannot tell the difference. And honestly, brass versus bone is not apples and oranges. Is apples and oranges. It's not an apples and apples comparison. However, there are Graphtec and other graphites and Tusk and other materials that you can make an apples to apples comparison between a bone and a synthetic, and you will not be able to tell the difference. You might tell yourself you can, but in a true test, you will not be able to tell the difference. Trogley says that all the time. And then even Mark Agnesi, yeah, just switch to a modern fret. It's like changing a car's tires. Yeah, I mean, honestly, to me, now, again, this is a very big preference thing, and this is really not better or worse. It's literally just education for those that are shopping for this kind of stuff. If you're stuck on vintage spec, think about fret size. You might not want to go vintage spec on your fret size. Some people will, though. You know what I mean? Some people will definitely do that. Let's see. Which one has longer sustain, bro? Narrow frets, low narrow frets are the absolute worst. Yeah, I mean, for me, you put your fingers all over the fretboard more, and it makes it to where, to me, I feel like I pull out of tune more. I feel like the string tension feels different with lower frets because you're pressing against the fretboard. Technically, if you're playing a guitar, really your fingers don't touch the fretboard unless you have really tiny frets. Most of the time they don't. Like if you go and look at, like, let's say you got 6150s or, some 6505s, something bigger, medium jumbo on a Strat, and you fret the third fret and you just push it enough to make it work, right? Like, don't bear down on it super hard, but press it down enough to make it work. The string doesn't touch the fretboard. Therefore, unless you have really fat fingers, which some people do, so this is different for everybody, but a lot of people, they never actually touch the fretboard. The strings don't touch the fretboard so it's a completely different feel. And here's another interesting thing about this, is really going into frets here, but and Chris from Highline is in the comments too, and he could probably attest to this when he's building for people, is what a lot of folks don't think about. There's three aspects in neck building that you need to look at together. Okay. So one is going to be the radius. That's not just, can I bend at the higher frets, but that's also can have an entire different feel of as your fingers come around the end of the fretboard, right? Because if your fretboard is really round, then how your fingers wrap around the side of the neck is going to feel different. So if you have a really flat radius versus a really curved radius, like a 7 1/4 versus a 12, that corner where your hands wrap over is going to feel different, right? Then of course the neck profile is going to make a difference. We'll get into that in a minute. But then also a lot of folks don't think about the fact that the fret size plays into the size, how the neck feels size-wise in your hand, because you're not just grabbing the neck, you're grabbing the strings on top of the frets, on top of the neck. So if you have really big frets or really small frets, the overall effective thickness of the neck at the first fret and at the, the ninth fret or whatever, wherever you want to measure it, are going to be thicker or thinner based on how big the frets are, right? Because the whole thing gets fatter when you put fat frets on it. It gets fatter at the corners when you put fat frets on it, when you put a flatter radius on it, and you have a fat neck. Those things kind of all work together. So when you're shopping for a guitar, think about all those things together. Instead of just being like, I want vintage, think about it. Like, kind of just dive into that a little bit. When I was designing a guitar, this was, probably 8 years ago. It's something I accidentally came across, like just literally as I'm sitting there, kind of with my eyes closed, thinking about it. I'm like, wait a minute. The only difference between these two guitars is the radius. And it's not the flatness that's bugging me. It's the corner. Right? So there's just some interesting things with all of that. Higher waist margin on bone than synthetic. Oh yeah, for sure, dude. You buy however many bone, like, I don't know, 50 in a bundle or 100 in a bundle, you throw away a third of them. More than that, maybe half. Hey, bud. He just really wants to be in here with me, huh? He just doesn't want to sleep. He's fighting, taking a nap. Puppy naps are funny. All right, so let's talk about neck profile. Honestly, vintage neck profiles are less consistent when you're looking at old guitars. Now, if you're looking at like reproduction stuff, obviously they're made on machines now, so it's fine, and it's probably gonna be more. It's going to be more consistent. However, there's a couple of vintage neck profiles that might surprise you. Like a V on a Fender has that real kind of funny point from the V to C from like the first fret to the fifth or so. It feels funny, especially like the Clapton style V. I can't stand. I will not play that guitar. I hate that neck. We all can play all necks, but that guitar drives me nuts. I don't like it. Old Gibsons are just huge. They're fat, right? The U, like a Blackguard Tele with a U style fret neck profile, is very singularly interesting, and it's something that is an acquired taste for those that are venturing into this and normally play regular C profile or slim C shaped necks. So there's a lot of because you got to remember back then, when they're using draw knives and doing stuff by hand to make stuff, it was easier to make a big fat neck. It just was. So, they can be a little weirder. And again, this is what you're into. If you like a big fat neck, then get a vintage spec neck for sure. And they're not all like that, but those are three that I can think of where somebody says, well, I want to get me a Blackguard Tele. And then they realize, oh crap, this U-shaped neck is weird. It's like big and like feels, you want to talk about thick, like shoulders and how your hands break over it. It's different. It's definitely different. So something to think about. And then there's people in the comments right now saying that they like a V with a 7 1/4 radius. Yeah, I mean, that's cool. So once you know that, that's awesome. I just like people to, again, this is all about everything has to be vintage. Hang on a minute, look at it, make sure it's something that you really want before you just dive right in, right? Like that's what we're doing. Kind of breaking it all down. I think it's really important. Let's see. So my buddy's 57 is a V, and it is not wide. It's narrow. And after I talk all this crap about not liking Vs, that guitar is one of my favorite necks of all time of any guitar I've ever played. That one, and I can think of a buddy of mine's got an early 60s Strat that I really, really like too. Yeah. So, and some people are discussing liking the 7.25 radius. I do too. My favorite though is probably like a 10 because it's kind of in the middle, which I kind of like. Let's see. Somebody is saying the comfy oval neck. See, and I don't like that big oval neck. I like, which is like a U. I like a slim C, which is a little flatter on the back. I think somebody else in here said they like a wider neck. So if you like a wider neck, then chances are you're going to want a more modern Fender style neck, or you're going to want a Gibson Slim 60s, right? Because it's going to feel wider because it's going to be thinner from the, this is an interesting phenomenon. I don't know if you feel this way, but for me, if the neck is thinner this way and a flat radius, the neck feels effectively wider. If the neck is thicker this way, like deeper, it could have the same nut width, but it just feels thinner on the front because it's thicker this way. Just the way it sits in your hand changes, right? Like how you hold a guitar really changes when you change that. So yeah, just something to think about. Nothing over a 12-inch for me, radius for me, says Magic Man. On an electric guitar, 100%. I totally agree. I like 12 at the max. Same thing. I 100% agree. Deep sea shallow. Awesome. This is great. I love the fact that everybody is, isn't there a D profile? Yes. So maybe that 60s is a D, not a U. I could be wrong about that. Maybe the one we were just talking about on the old Strat that's got that round back, that might be a D, not a U. So yeah, I could have that wrong. There's so many of them. It's crazy. And that's the other problem about vintage guitars. So like if you go, like let's say you're going to buy a Strat right now. If you go and you look at all the Strats, most of them, I feel like lately, from Classic Vibe through Mexico, through, your normal stuff. I'm not talking about like all the crazy reissue-y stuff and none of the musician stuff, like none of the signature stuff. I feel like they're really kind of simplifying it down to just a few neck profiles, right? And a lot of them are just a normal C. And 9.5, 7.5, or 7.25, 9.5. And they've simplified it. On the Gibson side, it's either kind of like a 50s or a 60s, right? So you got fat or slim 60s. And that's not totally true. I know that there's more out there than that, but it's pretty easy to kind of just simplify it down to that if you're trying to shop for stuff. Early 50s is U and D was more in the 60s. Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think you're probably right on that. And the early 50s U is the one I think of for like a Blackguard Tele. That's where my brain goes with that. And I don't like that. Let's see. Well, let's talk about pickups, because pickups is a big one, right? Well, first of all, before we get into pickups, let's talk the other electronics. So potentiometers, there's no point in worrying about it. Potentiometers are what they are. You're going to get CTS, you're going to get Borns, you're going to get Alpha. That's pretty much what you're going to get. You can get some really gnarly things like Dunlop. The Dunlop ones are $22 a piece or something, and they're supposed to be dust proof and all that. I've used them when I was working with John Cruz on some stuff. He used them and I didn't really like them. I thought they were just a pot that cost $22. I don't have any reason. CTSs are just fine for what I like. If you like a lower friction, the Born stuff is pretty cool. We are working on restocking Borns at Dylan Talks Tone because a lot of people have been wanting them. Hey, buddy. I just don't know what little parts are on the floor in there. I probably should clean up. We're like puppy proofing the house as we go here. Because we have the other dog too, but he doesn't eat stuff. So puppies eat everything. When it comes to caps, orange drops, paper and oil if you want them. Keep it simple, man. Don't go crazy. There's no point in it. You know what I mean? Vintage caps. There's no point in it. Do not go and spend $1 billion for Russian blah, blah, blah. Mil spec means garbage. The tolerances are all over the place. They're old. They've drifted. There's all kinds of reasons to not buy old caps and put it in your guitar. There's tons of reasons. They're just junk. They're just old junk. Get a Sprague orange drop, stick it in there. We sell the real ones. We don't sell the generic crappy ones that you can get on Amazon. We sell the real Spragues. Just get the real Sprague, put it in your guitar, and be happy. You could get paper and oil stuff if you want. Emerson's that cost $18. Whatever, man. All that stuff is just rebranded other stuff. It is. That's all it is. Some of the fancy pots like the EVH pots and stuff like that, it's just rebranded other stuff. Emerson is just rebranded and tolerance picked CTS. I mean, all my stuff is within 10%. I don't know how much better you can get than that, basically. And I'm not going to charge you $15 a piece for them. They're like $5, $6, whatever they cost. So, don't go nuts on vintage pots and caps. It just makes no sense. You should stock push pulls as well for the center punch pickups. Yeah, maybe. So here's the thing about those. I cannot stand them. I don't like them because they are not reliable. I don't care where you get them from. You will have a problem with them at some point, and I don't sell anything that I don't feel comfortable selling, and being like, this stuff is awesome. At least the ones available to me, I'm just not a fan of them. Maybe I'll look at it again. I guess I'll look at it again. Let me see what I can find. Because you're right. The center punch is one of our most popular pickups, and it is made to be coil split. So it probably would be helpful to sell push pulls. I will never sell push pushes. Those are, I think those are usually alpha, and they're not very reliable. Have you seen the Sterling K100? It's a V-neck with a 9.5. I have not. Push feels weird, and what happens is they're not very reliable, and if you do it wrong, you break it. So here's what happens. People will what you have to, let's see, which way is it? When you put the knob on, you have to push it so that it's down, and then put the knob on it and push it down, and then when you let go, it pops back up. If you do it the other way, you'll break the switch. Also, if you want to take the knob off, push it so it pops up and then pull the knob off. But because people don't do it correctly, my buddy at Jersey Shore Guitar Garage, he used to sell them all the time, and he stopped selling them because customer service was ridiculous on them. Because A, they're not very reliable, they break really easy, and B, people broke them because they didn't do it right. And then it was like, well, I didn't do it, you did it, and and then you fight about it, and it's like, I'm just gonna stop selling them because they're kind of junk. Or perhaps stock the small switches PRS uses. Yeah, the problem is, are mini toggles more reliable than push pulls? Absolutely they are. But then you got to drill holes in your guitar, and I never support that. I never support drilling holes in your guitar and putting more switches and more screws and more crap in your guitar. Simple, clean. I'm all about simple and clean, and so I'm not a fan. I would not sell that stuff because I just think people don't drill a bunch of holes in your guitar. It makes no sense. Okay, let's talk about pickups. So, vintage spec pickups. First of all, why? What are you looking for? If you're looking for hot pickups, you are definitely not looking for vintage spec pickups. However, if you're looking for loud pickups, because you're getting stuck in a mix and you're getting lost in a mix, then you want vintage spec pickups. Lower output is almost always better. It almost always is. Of course, there's applications that require a lot of high output stuff, but for the most part, lower output pickups are going to stick out of a mix better. If they're good, they're still going to push an amp just fine. You're still going to be able to get great compression. You're still going to get, but you're also going to get way more clarity. You're going to get way wider frequency response. The hotter they get, the narrower that gets. So yeah, I mean, to me, that's why we make what we make here. When it comes to the actual construction of the pickup, there's a couple of things that matter, and there's a bunch of stuff that doesn't. Nickel plated nickel covers are always better than brass plated or nickel plated brass covers. So cheaper pickups are going to have nickel or chrome plated brass. My stuff is going to be nickel or chrome plated nickel. That makes a big difference because we talked about eddy currents in a video yesterday. Oh, I almost dumped my, and that's a big contributor to it. We got a super chat from Lithium Man, Simple and Clean. Hey, I like Kingdom Hearts as well. I don't know what that means, but thank you very much for the super chat. Also, less compression helps you stand out. So, okay, being able to control it is the thing. So if you have a pickup that just hits the amp, then chances are, you're right. It will basically mush and you will get lost. But if you have a pickup that compresses when you want it to, but then you can like turn down the volume a little bit and have control over your compression, then you're in ultimate control of it and you can get what you want. To me, that's what I like. I like to be able to push the amp into compression, obviously, but I also want to be able to take it out of there if I want, just with the knob. I don't want to have to do it with pedals and all that kind of stuff. Now, of course you can, and that's all other things that you can build on top of it, but I want to be able to do it with just the guitar. Is the time of pink copper wire in pickups over? I don't know what that means because I've never seen pink wire. Oh, actually, I have. We did used to use it. It's actually red. I mean, I can still get it. It's just whatever is available. So, the colors of polynylon wire, which is what everybody uses now, for the most part, is usually it's clear, which is the gold because it's clear over the copper. And then you can get red, which sort of looks pink, and you can get purple, which then sort of looks brown and it looks like the plain enamel stuff. As far as pickup wire goes, coil wire, some folks will still use heavy form var and plain enamel, but you'll find that higher production shops will not use it anymore. It is literally twice as much. And I don't know, I think I've told you this a couple times in the last few weeks, but in the last couple months, copper has gone up 20%. Like the cost of our pickups, the cost of making our pickups went up 20% in the last 2 months. It's bonkers. Bonkers. Like we've not changed prices, but I hope we don't have, it's bonkers. I hope it's a spike. That's kind of what I'm hoping. Plain enamel's twice that. Plain enamel costs twice that. And there is zero benefit in using it. What you're concerned with is, basically the capacitance of the coating, which between plain enamel and single build poly, modern single build poly, it didn't always used to be this way, but it is now, is nil. Like the difference is nil. The thickness of single build poly versus plain enamel, also nil. Heavy form var, thickness versus double build poly, also nil. So there are, some folks will want those materials, but they have to pay for them. The junk costs twice as much. It would make it to where we would have to raise our prices by, I mean, probably 30-40%. Like it's expensive. And it doesn't make any difference. There's zero difference in the tone. And if people say that there is, they don't know how to make pickups. I know right now that, oh, my camera keeps moving because my hand, that's what it is. I have, I must have gesture something turned on my computer in it, on my camera in it. Oh, come on. Hang on. There we go. Yeah. If you are a person who makes pickups and you really understand this stuff and you're not just falling for any marketing garbage that is all over the internet all the time, you will know that there's no reason to buy that expensive stuff except to tell people that it's in there, which to me is a waste. ABS bobbins versus butyrate bobbins, 4 times the cost. No reason to spend the money on it. Because it's in there and you can't see it. Like, nobody cares. Maple spacers versus plastic spacers. You know, we're talking vintage versus modern stuff. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. It just doesn't make any difference. There's some of that stuff just does not make any difference. It's just what they had then. That's what they used. That's what they had. That's what was in stock. There's the butyrate thing is the same thing. It is an early plastic. They didn't have ABS. Then they switched to ABS. Simple as that. Yeah. Can you explain why brass isn't good, at least for pickups? Usually brass is not liked at all. Oh, sure. Absolutely. So brass is one of those materials. I think we talked about this in a video yesterday. Brass is one of those materials that, depending on where you use it in a pickup, usually it is in the covers and on the base plates, which can be the worst thing because it is a continuous flat surface perpendicular to the magnetic field. And when you have that, when you have brass that is perpendicular to the magnetic field, you introduce eddy currents. And what eddy currents are these little kind of swirls of magnetism, sort of. The easiest way to say it is like interference to the magnetism that's there in the opposite direction of the magnetic field. Not the opposite, but perpendicular to the magnetic field. And it goofs up the inductance in the coil. Typically what it does is it flattens everything. The very first thing to go away in any of this, because we're dealing with really low voltages, is frequency, high frequency. So you end up with muddy pickups. Now, people will say, wait a minute, doesn't DiMarzio use brass on all of their base plates? They do. However, well, not all of them, but it is common for them to use brass. You can engineer to that, but why? I mean, they did it, which is fine. I'm not going to do it. We're going to use nickel. Mostly because people think nickel is cheap, or brass is cheap, and it is. And I don't want to play into that. The other thing is, it's really hard to get good brass. So if you, like, for example, if you were to go right now on eBay, just for funsies, and type in brass base plate for a humbucker and just look at the pictures, the stuff's garbage. Like, it looks terrible. Like, it's from China. It's like super stamped out looking weird. I mean, I've experimented with it. I can't tell you how much hardware we've bought in the last 11 years and thrown in the trash. Because you buy it and you're like, this stuff looks like garbage, man. So even getting good nickel stuff, I can't tell you how much stuff I've thrown in the trash. Like, it's just junk. So to get really good hardware it's hardware. I mean, it's hard to do. It's hard to do. And it is not cheap. Hardware for this stuff is really expensive, but it's the better way to do it, in my opinion. Did the bronze mesh have an effect on the top of my P90s? No. And here's why. Because when you break it up and it's not a flat surface, those eddy currents cannot accumulate. So if you have, for example, a cheap, so let's say, okay, here's a great example. You could go on eBay right now and you can buy our Philadelphia Lutherie, and you can buy, well, their stuff is nicer. So let's say eBay. You can go on eBay and you can buy a brass humbucker cover that is a radiator top. Okay. And you won't get that same effect because the breaks in that break up the flat surface. Therefore, those eddy currents cannot develop. So the same thing with the mesh. That's why we picked it, and that's why I use the mesh I use, because there's no flat surface there to cause that problem. Which is kind of interesting. And on P90s, it doesn't really matter anyway, because the magnetic field goes above it because of the way it's constructed. Brass is not magnetic. Nickel is. Definitely a difference. No. So it depends on the nickel alloy. Okay. So nickel can be magnetic. It depends on the nickel alloy. And in guitar pickups, the nickel alloy that is used in base plates and in covers is non-ferrous. Okay. I mean, I could show you right now. We could take you over there and we could put a magnet on a base plate. And even though it is nickel, it will not stick to it. And it's because it's nickel and tin. And I can't remember. Maybe if Chris knows, he might be in the comments. He might be able to pop in the other couple things. But it depends on the alloy. Somebody asked me that about stainless too. Like, for example, this blade on this knife is stainless. This is magnet cut. And it's magnetic. But not all stainless is magnetic. It just depends on the alloy. So the alloy that is used commonly in pickup covers and base plates is not magnetic. And it can't be. If you used ferrous stuff in pickup construction other than the keeper bars, the pole pieces, and the magnets, your pickup wouldn't work. It's funny that people bring that up all the time. Yeah, but nickel's think for just 2 seconds about the words coming out of your mouth. Like, if it was all magnetic, that pickup wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. Interesting stuff, though. And that's why we got to have these conversations, because there's a lot of kind of common stuff. I think one of the things that happens a lot is because something is true in one industry, then it gets pulled into the guitar industry as if it were the only truth. And sometimes two things can be true at the same time. For example, stainless and or nickel can be magnetic or not, right? So, yeah. Curious thing, different parts of the same piece of metal can be magnetic or not. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. So it's not a blanket statement. And I think the other thing too is the thing is that this is all engineered, right? So we discussed briefly, and then I got sidetracked, but the brass base plates on DiMarzio stuff. Well, he's engineered around it, so it sounds great. So the biggest thing with all of this is, in all this vintage spec versus new stuff, is this. Do you like the guitar? Yep. Do you like how it sounds? Yep. Well, then who cares what's in it? Doesn't matter what's in it. The end result is how you got there, and or is what you have, and do you enjoy the guitar? That's 100% the thing. We've just found a way at Dylan Talks Tone to get to a lot of those vintage tones using modern materials. That's why we say Dylan Talks Tones, the new vintage, because that's what we do. Like, that's what we focus on. I suppose we should talk about finish, for example. So finish. Nitrocellulose is not what nitrocellulose used to be. It's great. It's cool, but it doesn't age the same way as it used to be. vintage nitrocellulose. It's not nitro. That's fuel for funny cars. It's nitrocellulose. And it is not what it used to be. The plasticizers are different because of laws. And so the way it ages, i.e. the way it cures or doesn't with time, is different than it used to be. And what really matters is the sealers that are used under it are different than they used to be. So it doesn't matter what paint is on your guitar anymore, because the sealer is probably the same. In fact, at Fender, I know it is. No matter what guitar you get at Fender, sans custom shop, any production guitar that you get at Fender is going to have the same sealer underneath it. So it doesn't matter. The wood's not going to totally breathe, bro, because it's got the same sealer underneath it. The only difference between nitrocellulose and urethane is how it feels. It's going to feel kind of sticky. And I like that. I like how it feels. I like nitrocellulose finishes because of how they feel. Is it a deal breaker one way or the other for me? No, I don't care. They're even not going to age the same. People say that like it is going to age. Yeah, it's definitely going to age more quickly than urethane, but it's not going to be the same. Yeah. So let's see. The flat parts of a stainless kitchen sink will probably not be magnetic, but the corners where it's bent can be magnetic. Yeah, exactly. Nitrocellulose finishes are pretty. I agree. I'm with you. I 100% agree. I like them a lot. Let's talk about wood. So wood's interesting because wood comes from a lot of different places these days. And we've done a lot of videos about this. This is obviously not about tone. I don't care about that. We're just really talking about where the stuff comes from. Anything that is not American made, I'm just going to put this out there just so you understand. Anything that's not American made, you might not and probably don't know what it actually is. If Gibson says it's mahogany, it might be Oakum with a mahogany laminate on a Epiphone Les Paul, for example. It might be white limba. It might be NATO. That's a big one for Fender. It might be Sapele. There's a bunch of weird mahoganies that aren't actually mahoganies, but they can call them that sort of. There's a whole thing about this. And one of my buddies who buys all the wood for PRS, Gibson, Fender, he does all kind of some Martin. Him and I have had like hours long conversations. He's explained to me a lot about like the sourcing of all this stuff. The bottom line is this: if it is an import version of an American guitar, okay, so we're not talking about Ibanez. We're not talking about any of those, like, let's call them not American, but sort of still could be very boutique-y sort of stuff, right? Like high-end ESPs and high-end Ibanez's and even like Eastman and stuff like that. But if we're talking about an import version of an American guitar, it's a crapshoot what the wood is. So don't worry about it. Just play it. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. It's just a crapshoot. Because it can be lots of things. And it probably is. He's told me a few things that I probably shouldn't repeat, because like major companies being like calling stuff that's not what it really is, even in their marketing material on their websites. So yeah, it happens. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. So just don't worry about it. Just play it. Just play it. You guys, this has been really fun. I like conversations like this. Somebody just ordered something from me. It says so on my watch. Thank you if you're watching right now. Yeah, man, this is super fun. I appreciate the hanging out. I love doing these podcasts on Tuesday. I love hanging out and just talking to y'all about guitar stuff. And hopefully, you might have learned something. You might have saved yourself some money, maybe. You know what I mean? So anyway, I appreciate it. Do me a favor and select hardwood. Yeah, that's a new one. People are doing that a lot. Yeah, what is Martin using? He told me what they're using. When it says select hardwood, I don't want to get that wrong. He told me what it is too. When it says select hardwood, it could be A, B, or C, and I don't remember what it is, but if I can find out again, I'll bring it up again and tell you. Because he did tell me specifically that. Martin is doing some stuff in Fiji with some mahogany, and they're doing some stuff, I forget where. He told me, I mean, we talked for a long time, so he gave me a lot of details that I might not have remembered. So anyway, like and subscribe, do all the things that you do when you watch a YouTube video, and please support the links in the description because that's what keeps us going, especially Dylan Talks Tone. Thanks. We'll see you later.